Testing the first video of 2025. Welcome back, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm Robin from This Blog's Neat, and since it is a new year, I wanted to kind of think about what the channel looks like in the future. And the videos that I really enjoy doing are more of the deep dives. And being that I am a chemist and a chemical engineer, I like to focus on the production process of making various spirits. So in this video today, I'm gonna go into a lot more depth than I normally do when talking about distilleries or a specific bottle that I'm tasting. So we're going to go on a little bit of a production process deep dive into Demerara Distillers Limited or Diamond Distillery in Guyana. Now I'm going to be doing that, and I'm also going to be tasting a bottle that I picked up while I'm out of town. I'm in DC right now. And this is an independent bottler who has bottled a 10-year-old Port Morant distillate. And so if you're not necessarily interested in the deep dive and just want to know what I think of this, I'll leave all the little future Robin will leave all the kind of timestamps down below, so you can kind of skip just to my tasting if you don't want to hear about Diamond Distillery and all of their various stills, which I'm going to be focusing on. And now I'm not going to be putting a lot of the focus on kind of the history of DDL or Diamond Distillery. As I said, I like to focus more on the production practices. And if you know Diamond Distillery, if you know Demerara Distillers, you know that they have some of the coolest and oldest stills in the rum world, the Port Morant still being one of them. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go on a little journey of all the stills at Diamond Distillery. So first of all, if you haven't heard of Diamond Distillery, they are owned by Demerara Distillers Limited in Guyana, and they are the only distillery left in Guyana. At one point, way back in the day, it was said that there were over 380 distilleries. They were all these small distilleries that were on the sugar plantations in Guyana, and over time, those whittled down to fewer and fewer distilleries until, I believe, 2000 or 1999 is when all of the other distilleries closed down, and the only one that was left was Diamond Distillery, that's owned by Demerara Distillers Limited, DDL. Now we have Diamond Distillery left that has all of the stills from those other distilleries in the region that closed down. Now, Diamond Distillery is a massive distillery. They are capable of producing 26 million liters of pure alcohol per year. They go through about 200 to 220 tons of molasses per day. And that is a lot of rum and a lot of molasses. So typically they use molasses that comes from the sugarcane grown all in the region, the Demerara sugar grown all in the region. But I do believe that recently they had to import some molasses because of their extremely high demands. They just weren't able to supply themselves with all the molasses that they needed. As far as fermentation goes, right, the first step of the production process, it's said that DDL has their own strain of yeast that they've cultivated. They have 13 fermenters that are 22,000 gallons each. 8 of those fermenters are closed and 5 of those fermenters are open. The closed fermenters, they actually capture the CO2 that's produced during fermentation, and then they use that for their soft drinks at their soft drinks plant. And DDL is the Pepsi franchise in Guyana. Their fermentation time is, I would consider, relatively short. It's between like 24 to 30 hours. And that's the case for all of the marks that they produce, except for their high ester mark, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But their high ester mark goes for a lot longer. It goes for months at a time. But all of their other fermentations are much shorter and under 30 hours. After fermentation, the wash is at about 7% ABV. And like I said, they produce essentially the same fermentation for all of their marks. And almost all of the stills, again, except for their high ester still, uses the same wash. So next step in the process, distillation. And this is the exciting part when you talk about DDL, is all the stills that they have. Now they have 9 different types of stills and 24 different marks, and we're not going to talk about each and every mark. I also don't know each and every mark, and I have seen various lists on the internet of all the different marks that they have, but I will talk about the stills now and what marks they are associated with. And we'll start with the one that's probably most well known. I've tasted a Port Morant rum before. I'm going to be tasting a Port Morant rum today. But yeah, we're going to start with their Port Morant still, which is a double wooden pot still. Now, if you are kind of familiar with the double retort pot stills in Jamaica, the double wooden pot still does not operate in the same way. So there are essentially two pot stills in series. The first pot is 3,000 gallons. The second pot is 2,000 gallons. Both of those are loaded up with wash, not with low wines. So the first pot is heated up, and that boils, and those vapors now feed into the second pot. But it's not those vapors that are totally heating the second pot like they would in a retort system, right? There is heat also applied to the second pot. It's more gentle than the first pot and a lot slower. And because the heating process is less aggressive and slower and longer, it's said that this allows for a higher temperature and vapor pressure to build up in that second pot before they are actually distilled over. Now, following that second pot is a retort, and this retort is loaded up with low wines, which gets a little bit confusing because if you are a home distiller or have worked at a distillery where you do double distillation, usually after the first distillation, what comes off the still you refer to as low wines. However, in the rum industry, especially the Caribbean rum industry, I believe when they refer to low wines, they're actually referring to tails. So during the spirit run, the stuff that comes off towards the end. So just like they do in Jamaica in double retort pot stills, the retort that follows the second pot is loaded up with low wines. That retort is actually heated by the vapors that are coming from the second pot. And then on top of that retort is a rectifier that allows for a little bit more rectification before the spirit actually is condensed and comes off the still. I feel like starting with the double wooden pot still was like starting with the hardest to explain type of still. Anyways, this process, an entire distillation using the Port Morant still takes about 16 hours, and you get between 240 to 300 gallons of spirit out of it at 84 to 87% ABV. Because of its production process and the way that it works, this supposedly allows for a lot more of those higher alcohols or fusel oils to come through in the spirit, which gives you a full body, kind of richer, oilier spirit. So the Port Morant still has been passed from one distillery to another and eventually made its way to Diamond Distillery in 1999. Before that, it was at the Iflot Distillery. Before that, it was at the Albion Distillery. And before that, it was at Port Morant. Now, the marks that are associated with this still are the PM mark or the MPM mark, which is what it says on my bottle here. I believe MPM stands for Main Port Morant, but I do believe that the PM and the MPM mark are kind of used interchangeably. If that is incorrect, please let me know. Now, I know that some other single cask bottlings have come out that are other marks using the Port Morant still. One of those being the AW mark, which one of my Patreons either has or had a chance to try. And that is a mark that originated when the Port Morant still was at the Albion Distillery. Now, like I said, the flavor profile of the rums that come from the Port Morant still tend to be a lot more heavily bodied, right? Nice and heavy and oily. And because it is made of wood, it's made of green heartwood, which is native to Guyana. It says that you get some of those woody, leathery characteristics in the spirit. Now, although the Port Morant still is kind of like this flavorful, full-bodied rum, it's actually pretty low as far as ester concentration goes. And if you are a rum fan, you probably chase after esters like I do. But there's a lot more to rums than just esters. And the ethyl acetate concentration, which is the predominant ester produced during fermentation and distillation of rums, is only 20 to 50 grams per hectoliter of pure alcohol. So pretty clean as far as ester profile goes. However, as I said, the Port Morant still produces some very, very flavorful rums. And a lot of those flavors are coming from the fusel oils that you get, which predominantly are isobutanol and isoamyl alcohol in the Port Morant distillate. Now let's move on to the Versailles still. Versailles, maybe it's Versailles. This is a single wooden pot still, which probably would have been the easier pot still for me to start with. This is a pot still that has a retort attached, a rectifier on top of that, and then the distillate is condensed. So similarly to the Port Morant still, the Versailles still, Versailles? I feel like I want to say Versailles. The single wooden pot still is made of green heartwood. The pot is loaded up with wash, and that's heated up, and then those vapors travel into a retort, which is loaded up again with low wines, I believe tails. Then that distillate travels through a rectifier and a condenser. This is a shorter distillation run. It's only about 12 hours, and because it is overall a smaller still, right? The Port Morant still, if you add up the two pots, is 5,000 gallons. This is only 2,000 gallons. So the spirit that you're going to get out of it is much less. There's about 180 to 240 US gallons at 84 to 86% ABV. Again, this still was brought to Diamond in 1999. Before that, it was at the Iflot Distillery. Before that, it was at the Enmore Distillery. And before that, it was at the Lusignan Distillery. I should have looked up how to pronounce that, but I didn't. And the marks that are associated with the Versailles still is the VSG, which stands for this, and is a mark from the Versailles Distillery, which I'm guessing is the Lusignan Distillery. KFM is another one, stands for this, from the Enmore Distillery. REV is essentially the same as VSG, or is said to be essentially the same as VSG, only now with caramel coloring added in. And because this is just a single wooden pot still, not a double wooden pot still, it's supposedly slightly less full-bodied and flavorful than the Port Morant still. Now, one thing I will note that's pretty cool is that both of the pot stills, the wooden pot stills, have cold water that's running over the top of them that ends up during a distillation run being steaming water. And the purpose of that is not to increase rectification or anything like that. It's actually to prevent the green heartwood from warping and shrinking or drying out or anything like that, and that prevents leaks. Okay, so we'll move on to another one of the very popular stills. This is the Enmore still, which is a wooden coffee still. So a coffee still has 2 columns. It's a 2-column still. In this case, the analyzer, the first column, has 25 copper sieve plates inside of it, and then the rectifying column has 32 copper sieve plates in it. And this coffee still was built using the original plans published by Coffey for the coffee still, the patented coffee still. The Enmore still got to Diamond Distillery in 1999. Before that, it was at the Iflot Distillery, and before that, it was at the Enmore Distillery, which is why it's called the Enmore still. And it has one mark that I know of that's associated with it, the EHP, which stands for Edward Henry Porter. Now we'll move on to the other coffee stills that are not made of wood. We have Diamond number 1, Diamond number 2, and Diamond number 3. Now, Diamond number 1 and Diamond number 2 were installed at Diamond Distillery in 1950, and the marks that are associated with them are SVW. Couldn't tell you what that stands for. If anyone knows, let me know. Now, Diamond number 3 is the newest of the bunch. This was installed in 2011, and this actually operates under a slight vacuum, which allows it to operate at lower temperatures. For the coffee stills, for the column stills in general, there's so much ash, limestone, minerals within the molasses and the water that the distillery uses that during distillation, it actually forms these solid cakes on top of the plates in the columns themselves. This obviously reduces efficiency in the still, and they have to be cleaned very regularly. So the coffee stills have to be cleaned every week to every 3 weeks, depending on which still it is and depending on whether or not they've noticed that efficiency drop. But it's actually, the cleaning process is actually baked into the entire production process. And crew members actually go in there, remove the plates, and scrape off, chisel off these cakes. Now, operating at lower temperatures allows this to be much easier. The cakes that form are much less solid, and it's much easier to clean. So Diamond number 3 is a little bit easier and more efficient. However, supposedly the marks that are associated with it are for special products and some exports only. Speaking of column stills, we have the Savalle stills, the Savalle number 1 and Savalle number 2, which are really, really highly customizable stills. They have 4 columns included, but you can kind of choose where you're pulling cuts from, depending on the type of rum that you're trying to make. Both of these Savalle stills came to Diamond Distillery in 1999 from the Iflot Distillery, and they have a lot of marks that are associated with them. Like I said, they're very customizable. So here are all the marks supposedly that are associated with the Savalle column stills. Now, something that's interesting about the Savalle stills is that during distillation, they actually recycle in the low wines back into the distillation. This is a continuous process, so that means that these low wines are constantly being recycled back in. And when I say low wines, what I mean is the tails essentially is being recycled back in. And DDL also has the MPRS still, which stands for multi-pressure rectification still, that has 5 columns and is essentially used to make neutral spirit and very, very light rums. What's cool about this, as it says in the name multi-pressure, is that the first 2 columns operate under vacuum. Then The following columns operate under atmospheric pressure and finally high pressure. This allows for easier cleaning and also an increase in efficiency. This was installed at Diamond Distillery in 2011, and the marks that it makes are these right here. Okay, last but not least, which I don't know why I have it following the multi-column still, but the Diamond High Ester still. All of the stills that I listed previously all use the same wash, but the Diamond High Ester still does not. It has its own fermentation. I believe these fermentations are even set away from all the other fermentations, and it produces a very, very funky, very high ester rum. So the Diamond High Ester still is a double retort pot still. The retorts are loaded up with high wines and low wines, which is also known as the early tails and late tails. And this still was installed at Diamond Distillery in 1950. So we should talk about the fermentation process for the high ester. So the fermentation for the DHE mark, or the Diamond High Ester, takes 3 months in total. This includes fermentation, and it also includes the addition of special acid mixture. This allows for esterification to go on over the course of like 6 weeks. It's said that the fermentation also includes some local fruits as well. So I don't know if this is using the yeast that's coming off of those fruits, right? I don't know if that's essentially acting as the yeast culture for the fermentation, or if they're still using the same type of yeast culture, but now adding in the fruits and adding in a special acid mixture. And the extended fermentation time is what brings up that ester concentration. I'm not entirely sure, but there is a very different fermentation process that goes on for the DHE mark. And then for a double retort pot still, it's comprised of a pot still and then 2 retorts that follow that pot still. And the pot is loaded up with wash. It's then boiled. The vapors from that travel into the first retort, which is loaded up with low wines, which is also known as the late tails. Those hot vapors then heat up the low wines, and those hot vapors travel into the second retort. And the second retort is loaded up with high wines, which is early tails, essentially. And those hot vapors heat up the second retort, which allows the vapors to travel up through another rectifier, which increases rectification, increases the purity of the distillate that's coming off the still. It also increases some of the reactions that are happening within the vapors that's catalyzed by the copper. That is then condensed off the still and comes out as spirit. And I don't know what the actual output is from that still. I don't exactly know what the size of the high ester still is. I don't have that written down, but that still is able to produce distillate that has 7,000 grams of ethyl acetate per hectoliter of pure alcohol. Now I know in Jamaica they also have the same capabilities, but in Jamaica we tap out at DOK TECC, which is at 1,600 grams per hectoliter of pure alcohol of esters, essentially ethyl acetate. So yeah, that concludes all the stills that are at Diamond Distilleries. So in summary, there are 3 wooden stills. There's a single wooden pot still, there's a double wooden pot still, and there is a wooden coffee still. Then there are metal coffee stills or copper coffee stills. Then there are Savalle column stills. Then there's a multi-column still, and we have our double retort pot still, which is our high ester pot still. And I think I've got all of them. After distillation, the spirit is aged, and the barrel entry proof that's pretty standard at Diamond Distillery is 70% ABV. It used to be higher. It used to be 84, which is just absurdly high if you come from the US, where the max barrel entry proof is 62.5% ABV. Even 70 seems high. Most of the casks that they use are ex-bourbon barrels. Now, it is hot and humid year-round, so there is a high angel share, but they say it's at around 7% per year, which honestly I don't think is that bad for how hot and humid it is all year round. Now, before I dive into telling you about the bottle I'm about to taste, I do want to give a huge shout out to my Patreons. Thank you guys so much for helping to support the channel. You already know that I got this bottle on my birthday, and we have talked extensively about it, and you have my tasting notes already as well. But if you, the viewer, also enjoy this video, enjoy my channel, and would like to support it further, besides just doing the YouTube things, you can join us over on Patreon, and I would be super thankful. But what I'm going to try right now is a Single Cask Nation bottling of the Port Morant distillate from Diamond Distillery. It is 10 years old. Actually, it's just a month shy of 11 years old. And this is, like I said, a single cask. It is cask number 29. It was aged for 10 years, well, 10 years and 11 months in second fill bourbon hogshead barrels. And there are a total of 271 bottles. Now, I picked this up at Potomac Wines out here in DC. And the reason I grabbed this was because I haven't picked up anything from Single Cask Nation, especially a rum. So Single Cask Nation was founded by a couple of guys, Jason and Joshua, who also run the Whiskey Cast podcast. And they founded this independent bottling company in 2011. And most of what they bottle is Scotch. However, recently, over the past handful of years, they've started to dabble more in the American whiskeys. I think they have an Australian whiskey right now. And I've seen a couple of rums. But I'm always really hesitant to grab rums that are bottled by people who are known more so in the whiskey world, just because I'm not looking for a rum that tastes like a whiskey, if that makes sense, right? I'm not looking for a rum that is so masked by barrel that it tastes like a whiskey. So I'm already, when I got this, as you can tell, I've had it for a little bit and I've been thoroughly enjoying it. But when I got this, I was a little bit skeptical of, what it would taste like. But it was only $100 from Potomac Wines, and I hadn't seen it before, so I grabbed it. And yeah, there wasn't much info on the internet about what it tasted like. I hadn't seen anyone do any reviews. And they have on their bottles kind of this profile of how floral, sweet, rich, spicy, nutty, earthy, smoky, and oaky it is, with tasting notes of brown sugar, dried fruit, and anise. So that's kind of the extent of what I was going into this with. And yeah, I'm going to give you my tasting notes now. So this has a good color. This is non-chill filtered and has no caramel coloring added. Diamond Distillery does typically add caramel coloring, so just keep that in mind. But this has a good, rich copper color. And the first things I get are maple and char. There's also some prunes and then some charred spices like charred cinnamon bark, salted caramel. It's custardy with almost like a yogurt tanginess. There's definitely vanilla in here. A lot of maple, still a lot of maple. Some floral aspects as well too. A little bit more mixed dried fruits, but it's pretty desserty and rich on the nose. There's some honey as well. So there is a little bit of heat. It's like slightly prickly, not too bad, with a good viscosity. And the first flavor I get is like juicy fig jam. But then the first sip, right, and this has kind of been the case every time I've had it, the first sip, I get char right off the bat. I get char and a lot of barrel spice. So when I first opened this, first took a sip, I thought like, okay, I've gotten a rum bottled by whiskey bottlers. And so I was like, all right, this definitely has like, it's not super New American oaky because I don't get a whole bunch of that like caraway thing that I typically get with New American oak, but it does have just like a lot of char to it on the first sip. But on the second sip, I start to get more of these deep, dark, dried fruits that are accompanied by toasted spices. So like prunes plus dates, maybe some like a little bit of like dark syrupy cherries, but no little like tart cherry thing, just syrupy cherries and very, very light. And there's also like a toasted nut thing, like Brazil nuts, as well as pecans. So with each sip, this got better and better and is getting better and better. Yeah, there's more of like that toasted star anise. There's allspice, a little bit of clove. It still has a lot of those rich barrel char components, but with every sip, I get less convinced that it's a rum for like only whiskey drinkers, if that makes sense. I think this is really enjoyable. I mean, being that I am both a whiskey and a rum drinker. And I do really like it, and I do like that I got it for $100. I think if it was any more than that, I would be a little bit disappointed, but it is really nice. And interestingly, I enjoy drinking it a lot more than I enjoy tasting it. And I think that's because it's relatively simple and just decadent. I shouldn't say simple, but as compared to some other rums that I really enjoy, this is more simple and a really good kind of like daily sipper. So the question is, will I pick up another rum from Single Cask Nation? Probably not. They probably won't be my first bottler to go to if I'm looking for a fun rum to pick up, but I am happy that I grabbed this. But yeah, if you have tried this rum in particular, have you tried other rums from Single Cask Nation, other bottlings of Port Morant? Please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. If you have any questions, if anything I was saying was kind of not clear, if I kind of breezed over some things that weren't clear, please let me know. I'd be happy to elaborate more on any of the stills that I talked about, or any parts of the production process that I breezed over. Please let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, let me know, because moving forward, I'm going to try to post more videos where when I do tastings, I also go on a little bit of a deep dive that is related to what it is that I'm tasting. My tasting videos tend to be pretty easy to do because they don't require too much preparation. However, moving forward, I will do a lot more preparation because I think I would like to get more of those deep dives out onto YouTube. So let me know what you thought.